on, everybody? Welcome into the Highlighted Business Podcast for business people, and only the most serious people in the world join our show. And today, obviously, I've got just another serious guy that doesn't laugh at all, never takes himself less than the most serious possible. And, of course, that's a joke. But today, I've got the Dr. Jeremy Fyke from Belmont University. Jeremy, welcome into the show, man. Thanks for joining me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, well, I love your background, and I've been digging in, and there's so many different avenues we can go down here. But I would love for you to set the stage for us here before I get to yammering too much, and just tell everybody a little bit about you.
Absolutely. Yeah. No. Thanks again for having me on here. And so been in Nashville for about 7 years, and so full time job is I teach at Belmont University. I'm an associate professor in corporate communication. The department I teach in is actually communication studies, but my main area of focus is corporate communication, which is kind of, some people are familiar with that outside of academia, but not a lot of people are as far as what that looks like in academia. So it's kind of a fusion of communication and business, right? Corporate communication. So I do a lot of work in areas of leadership and organizational culture and those types of, fields within and subdisciplines. But I also direct a graduate program at Belmont. So we have a Master of Science in Strategic Communication and Leadership. So I'm the director of that program. So that's the full-time gig. I've been at Belmont now for 7 years. Before Belmont, I was a professor at Marquette University in Milwaukee. So I've had the good fortune of teaching at a couple of good basketball schools. No football yet. I say yet. I don't really plan to go anywhere. But I did go to grad school at Purdue. So we had some pretty good football times. Right now, we're still kind of hurting from a bad day of basketball last week. But anyway, so I'm still a proud alum though of Purdue. So yeah, so that's a little bit about me as far as the full-time gig at Belmont. And then outside of that, I've got a couple of other things that I do. Sometimes on the side, sometimes more than on the side, but I own a training and development business. So my business is called Jeremy Fyke Leader Development. And I'm very intentional about the word leader development, not leadership development. And perhaps we can come back to that and talk about that in a little bit. But So yeah, Jeremy Fyke Leader Development is really a firm that specializes in authentic leader development. So we do anything from training workshops where I come in and do a 2-hour workshop or intensive. We may do a full day. We may come in and work with you for 12 months, do a full year long program. And I also do some online asynchronous learnings. I partner with companies and do consulting, but also I do executive coaching, one-on-one coaching as well. And then outside of that, I also own a hot sauce company, and we are called Two Heads Hot Sauce. So think of two bald guys. My business partner is not quite as good looking, but he has the same haircut as me. So anyway, so my partner Casey and I own Two Heads Hot Sauce, and we've been in business since the end of 2020. And kind of started off as making a batch of hot sauce in the kitchen, and has really grown fast. And so maybe we could talk more about that as well, as far as what that looks like. But yeah, that's a flyover. And then I've got a wife and 2 kids as well.
Jeez.
So.
A couple things come to mind. Immediately, I'm upset because I can never buy into the Two Heads hot sauce thing unless I lose all my hair, and I think my wife would be a little upset with me about that. So that dream is gone. So let's go ahead and scratch that. But the first question I have after all of that is do you live on a 30-hour-a-day clock? How do you just time management really briefly? You got a lot of things you're balancing there. Do you have anything because every entrepreneur out there listening, every marketing leader listening right now, their calendars are booked. Is there a tip or a trick that you think through when you're thinking time management?
And it's it's probably the question that I get asked more than any, right? Whether I'm, training a group, coaching a group, talking to students, teaching, right? Whatever it is. I get asked that question a lot. And I always tell people, I wish I could, in 20 seconds, 30 seconds say, oh yeah, here's what I do. But it's very much, for me, it's more art than science. But the key to the art is really being intentional. And there's one tool that I use more than any, and it's not really a tool, it's more of a practice or a mindset, but it's just deliberate trade-offs. I mean, honestly. And what I mean by that is I actually just sort of think about it this way. If if you want to live on a limited budget, you have to make trade-offs, right? But you make those trade-offs so you can say yes to other things, which also happens to be true for us. My wife is a stay-at-home mom. We're a single income family, and that's intentional. It always has been since we had our first. And so because of that, there's a lot of things we don't do, right? And so it's the same with time. So I get asked to do a lot of stuff, and I do a lot of stuff, but I also don't do a lot of stuff. And I think that's part of it, is just really being intentional. There's other things that we can talk about. Like if you're interested, like I try to keep, like, I usually we'll spend some time keeping a time audit and those kind of things, just to see in certain periods of my life how I'm spending that time, and that kind of helps me be accountable, but also be reflective of where that time is going. So, and then another practical thing is very, very concretely, as much as possible, I try to hire people to do stuff.
Yeah, that's good. And that's a perfect segue into the leadership thing, because now we're talking about leading people. And so, it's funny to me that Belmont does things beyond just music, because I swear every person I've ever met, my last job was at a place called Ramsey Solutions down in Franklin. And I swear every person I met worked or went to school at Belmont and then had some sort of music background. And like, I'm not musical at all. And so I don't know if you have musical in your background at all. I mean, It doesn't sound like it because you're a transplant like me, but man, it's like, you can't throw a rock without hitting a musician in Nashville. It's a cool place to live, but I mean, it is a musician-heavy place. So Belmont, you guys are actually building the next generation of leaders there, which is interesting. And you did say something, leader versus leadership. So let's start there. Like, unpack that. Why are you so intentional about leader versus leadership?
This is something that was really pressed into me. It kind of started when I was doing my graduate work, specifically when I was working on my doctorate. I was fortunate enough to spend like 2 months at a leadership development firm that really specialized in like authentic, what they would refer to as like deep work, right? As far as leadership development and even then, right, leader development. And so for me, I just always said, okay, and so it was pressed into me early, but then the more experience I got with actually doing work with leaders, the more I realized that it has to be about the person that's developing, not just the skills that they're learning. So I always tell people, no amount of skills training, right? No like volume of skills training, no amount of skills or whatever are really going to make a long-term difference, maybe even a medium or short-term difference, if you're not really careful and intentional about the person you're becoming and how you're developing. So that's a philosophy, but it's also incredibly practical in terms of actually making a difference. And so what I said, like when I started doing more trainings, when people started asking me to do more developmental work, I said, I get to be intentional about how I craft this company, right? And so I called it Jeremy Fyke Leader Development. And I said, okay, I'm gonna make sure I really hammer down person, not skills, right? It's really about, sort of the craftsman, so to speak, not the tools, right? And so I try to really focus a lot on personal development outside of any kind of specific, tool for your tool belt. So that's a little bit about that.
Yeah, I love that. So what are what are some of those characteristics that you're looking to build inside of that leader versus just giving them hey, here's how you do a one-on-one meeting? I'd love to know the difference there.
Yeah, for sure. So like if we take like one example, I was at a company last month, February 21st, I think it was, doing a 3.5-hour workshop. And so we were talking a lot in that workshop about like active listening skills, for instance, right? It was like one little slice of content. And so I told him I could teach you active listening and that's fine. But what I want you to do is I want you to kind of perform, like, just to go through a quick example, like what's referred to as like a gap analysis, right? Like as a leader, the leader you are now is, and kind of think through who that person is, right? Not how you are as a leader, but who you are. And then who's the leader you'd like to be? And so that kind of allows a leader to develop a sense of the why. Because you could learn, and most people know, like if I were to ask you, most leaders, right, what is active listening? They can kind of tell you, right? Well, listen without judgment, paraphrase, all the mechanics of it. But why? Who are you going to be as a leader? How much more effective can you be as a leader or as a husband, as a dad, if you're a better listener? So that would be kind of one of those things, right? That would be an example where it's about the person you want to be. And that same lesson applies whether you're talking about becoming a better listener, even something super concrete and tangible, like I want to, I want to turn my phone off at night or put my phone in the other room so that I can be more present with my family. That's a tip. That's a skill or a habit. It's kind of a hack in a way, right? To be able to be better, but it's going to be more effective if you can better identify on the front end the person that you want to be as a result of that.
Yeah.
So that
I
would be,
remember. Have you ever read Atomic Habits by
yes.
James Clear? Mm-hmm. So he talks about, this was the first time I had ever heard anybody mention this sort of thing that you're talking about here with. It's like, it's not just enough to change the habit. You have to change the identity associated with the habit, because you can, all of us have probably lost 10 or 20 pounds post-college 100 times, right? And that is a function of us installing a new tool. Maybe it's keto, maybe it's fasting, maybe it's whatever lemon juice cleanse. Like, that's why those diets cycle in and out so fast. But the problem, in my at least experience with my own personal health journey, if we're talking about that lane, is just identity. It's like, you have to become the kind of person that is like, people like us act like this. I think maybe that was Seth Godin that said that. And it is a, if you're going to be a leader, the Air Force, I was in the Air Force for 4 years right out of, I failed out of college, but that's another story for another time. But I left college, was told to leave college. Not like you. I should have followed you. I think I would have done better. But I joined the Air Force as an enlisted guy, and it's funny to me how good they are about instilling identity into everybody that joins. That like, hey, you're at this rank. There's a bunch of people that have come before you. They all acted like this. It's going to be up to you to carry on and hold the standard. And like, when you get to that next position, sure, there's leaders that don't hold the standard and they don't, embody that identity of what a U.S. Airman leader is going to look like. But for the most part, most people do. And, they have one of the most successful, Air Forces in the world. I mean, it's not one of the most, it's the most successful, and it's not even close. And that's maybe a function of budget, but it's still a function of like leadership development and training for sure. But it starts with identity, because day one in basic training, you are stripped of who you used to be, and now you are who you are now. So I love that. I think that's great.
And it's, in that book, he talks about identity, but also systems, right? Those are kind of, they're sort of, I don't know if they're a coin or what they are, but they're closely related, because the identity piece, and I think the example he gives with identity is, if somebody offers you a cigarette, rather than say, I'm trying to quit, you say, no, I'm not a smoker, right? That's fundamentally, it represents a different identity. And so this is, like, for me, I'm a person who, and I always try to encourage my clients to come up with I am statements, leadership I am statements. I am a leader who, fill in the blank, right? And then that tends to lead to habits that and skills. For instance, I consider myself to be a bold leader, and what that means is I'm not going to shy away from difficult conversations. So you could teach me how to have difficult conversations, right? And there's plenty of workshops out there that can do that, but I gotta fundamentally change, to your point, the identity piece of that. So yeah, it's huge. And then, of course, create systems. And so back to one of your original questions about like, what are those mindsets? One of them is reflection, or that's a skill. I train leaders on reflection skills to be able to get to that point.
That's good. And then I saw on LinkedIn the other day, I'm going to see if I can get this right here. You said building relationships was a critical competency for any leader, and both internal and external. So that sounds like another skill and another identity that you have to come up with. Why is communication so important for building that leader?
Yeah, that's huge. And I think I remember in that context when I said that about relationships, that was some content that I was working through and working with a client toward. And I think the thing about it is for me as a person that's got a couple of degrees in communication, like I'm going to say that's really important, right? So to try to make it less generic than that, I'll say that it just has, it really runs through everything that you're going to do, right? I mean, if you're building relationships with people, some of that is about creating systems of support. If you and I work together, it's important for me for you to know what I know, and for me to know what you know, and then for other people to know what we know. And so it's about relationships, and those relationships sometimes they're very instrumental in terms of helping people get stuff done, and communicating that. But I think on a more fundamental level, it's really also about just making connections with people, and just having that. Like, I had coffee with somebody yesterday that, Yeah, I mean, on the calendar, there was probably an instrumental purpose for that conversation, right? But really, it was just about human connection, right? It was about us getting together. And guess what? There were some pretty cool business ideas that came out of that, which were not the plan of the meeting. But if we're not intentional, again, that's one of those I say yes to because I think it's going to be good to communicate in that way. And as leaders, and he's a leader as well, like coming together and just really having those conversations. So, I mean, every job that's done, every business is based on really two core activities. If you really break it down, there's relational aspects and there's task aspects, right? There's getting stuff done, and then there's people that get stuff done, right? So communication is to me is kind of the thread that brings those together, or the glue that brings those two things together.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, as a digital advertising company, you know, Highbeam, the company that I founded a couple of years, I mean, right around the same time, about 10 months after you did your hot sauce venture. But the something about the pandemic made us all entrepreneurs again, which is a whole nother funny thing we can get into.
Yeah.
But it's funny because we talk to a ton of business owners, and we're working through their marketing plans and stuff. And this is marketing and not so much leadership. But humans are still humans. You just said that, and it's 100% right with your advertising plans as well. Like, people think that, I'm just running this ad on a Facebook or a Google or whatever, and they think they're running an ad to a platform or to an algorithm or something like that. And I'm like, guys, you got to put yourself in the other person's shoes. Like, it is empathy and context. Like, what are they doing on the other side of this? Like, what are they Googling? Why are they Googling it? And if you're in a leadership position, it sounds like, you know, if you're having that weekly one-on-one with somebody, it's like, hey, why is this person not performing when every other week before this they've performed? And maybe they've just had an off month. Like, did they just change as a person? Did their identity change? Or do I need to drill in and ask better clarifying questions to find out, like, do they have something going on in their home life? Like, it is positional empathy really matters to me.
Oh, man.
Like, just always thinking about the other person. But the question then I have on the back of that is always, like, how do you know when enough is enough? Like, how do you know when it's sort of time to, you know, we've done the coaching, we've done all the things, we've done the communicating, the listening. Like, now it's time to sort of have that difficult conversation and part ways. Can you walk through how a great leader does that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think you do have to keep an eye on that, right? The reality is execution matters. Results matter. I think everybody loses in a business, whether it's small, medium, large, when there's not a focus on results, right? So you have to kind of think about, and I think arguably in some ways, this is maybe where, like, the whole family metaphor that we like to use might break down some, because, like, I'll teach my kids something, and if they end up failing, I'm probably not going to fire them from the family, right? And I think there's perhaps some examples, you know, of companies that have tried the no firing model, right? Like maybe a couple, but eventually everybody might be better off if somebody else goes. Mm-hmm. So I think that's like rubber meets the road. As an example, I might look at just in my world, like specifically, I might look at a student, like one of the most difficult conversations I have with students is cheating, plagiarism. Well, that's a fireable offense if you want to look at a direct correlation, right, or a parallel. So a student could probably at least fail the assignment, probably fail the course, maybe get kicked out of the university, right? So that's pretty serious, right? And to the student at that time, it seems pretty serious for sure. So I can work with the student and I can help them and I can show care for them and empathy, which I try to, right? But at the end of the day, nobody's going to be better. No, it's not fair to other people, and it's not fair to them if you let people slide. So I think you just have to kind of know what is that, stopping point, for lack of a better term, of where you've got to cut. You know, what's the term? Cut bait and fish.
Yeah,
or something?
it's like yeah, you go cut bait and run. I think there's no. There's no way to, like, actually define a hard endpoint. Like, you've messed up 4.76 times, and now it's time for us to move you on. I mean, that is relationship. I mean, leadership is art, I think, at the end of the day, right? There are some science and tactical things we can do, but I think it was Coach K that said this, like, you have to coach each player unique to their skill set and their personalities and all the things. And so, when a person is, I don't know. You just know when you know. It's sort of a weird thing to do. And I'm a big fan of intention, too. If I can look myself in the mirror at night and go, I tried really hard. As a leader, I probably messed some things up. But at the end of the day, I I feel like I did everything I could in my power to make this work, and I wasn't taking advantage of this person. And that's usually when I end up being okay with it. And I don't know, maybe that's the wrong way to look at it, but it doesn't happen often. But every once in a while, it will come up. Except for the only times I fire people point blank is when we have like a what I call we don't have a real name for it. It's like you go over these guidelines or these guardrails that we have set up. So if it's like you can't bankrupt the brand and you can't bankrupt the company, if your actions do one of those two things, like I can't really Monday morning quarterback that for you, but everything else we can go and like everything else is coachable to a certain point. And I think you said something in there about being a professor and talking to kids and working through things. And so obviously your experience in education and your doctorate and all the things are around leadership. Like, what do you think you've learned in the educational space primarily that gives you a little bit of a unique perspective versus like somebody like me who's come up military, corporate America, entrepreneurial, small business? Like, what's different about the academic environment? Like, what are some of the different perspectives that people like me should learn from people like you that maybe we don't think to ask those questions because we're just not from that world or we don't have those perspectives every day?
Yeah. I love it. That's an awesome question. I it's one of those things I'm like, that's a good lesson there. More people should ask that question, actually. I think that there's some things about, academia. Like, I'll just say one thing is curiosity and questions. I think that's two things, right? Like that would be a lesson, truly, right? I think that would be a lesson. I think academia, and I this has always been something that was a goal of mine, to be a professor and have my own business where I work in the corporate space. I never wanted to be, and I don't mean this to disparage any of my colleagues, I never wanted to be just a professor, right? Does that make sense? I don't want to, I didn't want to, I always wanted to, especially in my field, like my PhD is in organizational communication. Makes sense for me to spend some time in organizations. I always felt that way, right? It seems so obvious to me. Mm-hmm. So much of my research was very applied, and my practice now is applied. So for me, just the process of asking questions, I think, is something in an academic space that we just get to do. I mean, if we're being honest, like, and I tell my students this because I want them to realize what a blessing it is, right, to be in the space that we're in. Like, we can sit and we can talk about, in my corporate social responsibility class, at a symbolic level. Like, our problems are symbolic; they're not material, right? They just are. And like, we can talk about the banking crisis without dealing with the banking crisis. Mm-hmm. And if you're in the professional space, you're usually figuring out the crisis, not talking about it. But I do think that there's a lesson to be learned of pausing. I mean, there's a reason why over the last couple of years, I get asked to do a ton of content on critical thinking, problem solving, decision making. A lot of people are hungry for the opportunity to slow down, step back, and ask questions. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one lesson that the professional world can get from academia is make sure to carve out space for that.
That's good. I'll give you another sort of tactic that I do because I don't find myself with a lot of time, and I'm not very intentional about it a lot of times because you sort of get into the day-to-day grind of just making things happen, and then 5 o'clock-ish hits, and then you're like, all right, I got to go put the dad hat on, and I got 2 kids like you, so I'm like trying to change gears and not bring home work and leave my phone in the office and all the things. Yeah. I have found that if I spend time trying to create a small piece of content for the internet, for social media, whether it's LinkedIn, a blog, a podcast, something like that. If I block out like an hour, maybe 2 hours a week for 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 pieces of content, I get a ton of clarity being able to go back and, I love what you said there, ask questions intentionally and really follow my curiosity. That's really good. And I think if you pick a medium to sort of like publish your thoughts on, there's something about having to set aside that time. The other day I did this keynote for a Chamber of Commerce down here. Yeah. And I had to sit down for it must have been 15 hours worth of work that I put into a 45-minute presentation. Yeah. And it's so funny how much clearer I was on every sales call after that for marketing, because I was like, I'd done all this deep work about a lot of theories and sort of feelings, and I put actual tactics and words and systems to it to where I had to go teach basically for 45 minutes, and I didn't want it to be a sales pitch or anything. I wanted them to come out with something very practical and tactical. But just having that space, now I wouldn't recommend 12 hours a week, but a small system like we've been talking about here of like saying, hey, I identify as the kind of leader that's going to take time to really process my thoughts and do some deep work around, not just theorizing, but actually creating some sort of system. And I love the idea of publishing it out on social media. Have you had any, I've seen that you've done some YouTube videos and some LinkedIn. Have you had any thoughts around going out and making content and how that helps you become a better thought leader in this space?
Yeah. When COVID hit, a lot of the content that you see now, like whether it's in my YouTube channel or other places really started then because all my work was in person, right? I was going to Dollar General Corporation and Tractor Supply Company and all in these different clients that I work with. But like when COVID hit, those were all postponed. It turns out they were, because we didn't know at the time, right? We don't know how long it's going to go. Things got canceled. And so I gotta have some content, frankly, to sell. And so I started doing videos. That was the time that I was producing a lot more content. I just haven't done a lot, honestly, since then.
It is time consuming.
What's that?
I said it is time consuming. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I've always been the kind of person that like it's funny because I have a lot of stuff that's, I suppose you probably could Google it and find it, but like I have aside from my website and things, I have like actually an online university that I set up through Teachable, and I haven't even looked at that in over a year, which is crazy. But again, a lot of that I was building right when COVID hit. So there's actually quite a bit of content on there, and then I do have a lot of content that I create for some of my clients that's I have access to, but it's not public, right? So I was actually like, no kidding, about an hour before we logged on, I was talking to my wife because she manages my websites and does a lot of our graphic design work for the businesses and stuff, about needing to get into my online courses and refresh some things and get them ready to go. So it's like, I wouldn't even call it top of mind. I don't even know where it is. Bottom of mind, like down here.
It's on the ever-growing list of things that have to happen, and you got to just make time for it, which is always rough. But it's always valuable when you do.
Yeah, and it's that constant balance. Just, I was going to say as a leader, but just as a human, of like enjoying. Part of why I haven't done a lot of that is because I haven't needed to, right? Because there's been other business elsewhere.
Yeah.
So don't get complacent, right? Like my dad taught me at an early age, like he always told me, dig your well before you're thirsty. And I've always loved that, right? Like that there's also a book by that title. I've not read it. I don't know if he has, but dig your well before you're thirsty. So like at this point, things are going well. So I got to be careful, like enjoy, my girls are 8 and 5. And so there's a lot going on. And so I'm enjoying that, man. And like, but just don't, like, gosh, as soon as something dries up, see, there's all, it's just I don't know. Let's talk about art, right? I don't know how to,
but my thought is you go back to the system and you just say, like, what is the small, like, so fitness is one of the things I'm trying to get into now. And like, again, for the 100, and like this year is sort of the year I've fixed it seems like. And, today it's like, it's going to rain. I got a crazy busy schedule. It's Friday. Want to have time with the family tonight. So, just did a little 30-minute walk at lunch today. Took a little walk right before it rained here in Nashville, and and that was enough. And that was like, it's not the best workout I've ever had. I'm not going to have some crazy PR on the bench press next week because of it, but it was a small vote in the right direction for the type of person I want to become. So I think what I'm hearing you say, and tell me if this is wrong, is like sort of, in the quiet morning or late at night, whatever is better for you, sort of get into a journal or just a yellow pad or something and sort of write out what kind of leader do you want to be. Backtrack it and say, all right, what are the 3 to 7 things I'm doing that are establishing this gap between where I'm at now and what's on this piece of paper? And then come up with some sort of small system and daily system or weekly system where you can just check it off on a checklist. The effectiveness of checklists, by the way, is something I'm super passionate about. I think everything should be a checklist. My restaurant background days, like everything was a checklist, and it made everything run so much better. That's a whole nother thing. And then establish that checklist and then hold yourself accountable to it. Do you think, last question here, and then I do want to ask you about the hot sauce stuff, is do you think you need some sort of is it getting a one-on-one executive coach, somebody like yourself or somebody else, or is it getting around friends? Is it having community? Like, there's got to be something around a social aspect to changing as well, right? Where you're around other leaders that are pushing you either in a coaching capacity or in a friend just holding you accountable capacity. Do you think one of those works better? Do you think it's worth having? What do you think about that?
So definitely. I think both things. I always teach and really, 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 evangelize two forms of accountability, right? So when it comes to leadership, I always say there's three keys: authenticity, action, accountability. 3 A's, AAA, right? So authenticity, be real, see yourself as a work in progress, right? Action, practice small things, small wins, right? And in a given period of time. So I'm going to be better, more assertive over the next quarter. And I'm not saying you'll be perfect at that in that quarter, but that's your goal. That's what you're working on. And then accountability. So with accountability, two forms: accountability to yourself. So a journaling practice, right? This is one of mine. I've got like 3 or 4 different journals, different times, right? Another form of accountability, time audits, that kind of thing, right? Other accountability is the second type. And then I always recommend with other people, like have a few different types of like mentors in your life. And that could be extremely informal, right? Somebody that's kind of young and maybe new to what they do, somebody about the same level as you, and somebody who's older. And where you are, what season you're in, you may pull on, for lack of a better term, one of those mentors more, right? Like if when we're releasing something brand new, when we have a new, more of an emergent, not a deliberate, but an emergent strategy, I might pull on that younger person and be like, hey, what do you see here? Mm-hmm. Or on the other side of it, somebody who's had some experience, right? So I think, unfortunately or fortunately, both have to be there. It's a both and. Yeah. Self accountability and other.
I like that. That's good. I like that a lot. I'm trying to figure out a way to like wrap back around to this because it's so timely right now, and I just need to make this clip for the internet. So this is not good hosting right here, but this is a question I got to know about. So every headline that I see is this company's laying off 10,000, this company's laying off 5,000, et cetera, et cetera. A few of those, I'm sure, are actually P&L driven, balance sheet driven. We can get into the ethics of shareholder responsibility, yada, yada. But like that, don't even get me started from a leadership standpoint about that stuff. Like, what are your thoughts as somebody that literally is teaching leaders every day and you're in these sort of larger organizations? Like when it comes to layoffs, like, is there like, how does somebody, I think I had to ask this question. How do you lay a bunch of people off and then look in the mirror when you didn't have to and you say, I'm still a good leader? Like, is that possible? Is there a world, like, help me make sense of layoffs because I'm a small business guy and I just don't understand it emotionally. And maybe it's just because I've never been in that world.
Well, and I don't know any specific examples to even be able to point to, let alone, try to, but we talked earlier about, being able to kind of lay your head down at night and feel okay about it. People find a way to do that even when they do stuff that we think looks kind of crazy, right? I mean, there's sort of that like rationalization or justification. And some of it is, hey, you made the business case, right? There's a business case for downsizing or right sizing, all those terms that we hate, right? But I think that some of it could be, Maybe people got a little bit too, hired too many people when COVID hit and now they have too many people, right? So I think people got used to subscriptions and now there's not as many or something, right? There's some of those like market driven forces that may relate. And then you could easily say, well, we just had to do it. So yeah, I think people are surprisingly good at convincing themselves that what they did was okay.
Yeah. I just feel like it should be, I mean, I just want to see the organization that's like, and it's so hard with a publicly traded company at least because their number one objective is protecting shareholders. Like they live quarter to quarters for the most part, and it's tough. I mean, versus like you and I running small businesses, it's like we have to be able to look these community members in the face because they know where we grocery shop. So it's a little bit of they may go to the same church as you, they may go to the same restaurants, they may go to the same soccer clubs. It's a lot different pressure, I think, when it's local. So. But that's good. I like that. So I do want to talk about this two heads hot sauce thing because I was telling you earlier, we've got a video coming out on the channel here in a couple weeks where we Austin Lynch, my co-founder, and I are going to do the Hot Ones challenge. And now that I know that you've got a hot sauce brand, we're going to get one of your sauces in the lineup and take one of those other guys out. And so I want to know, like, how do you go from I'm a leader, teacher, and I do all those things to like I want to open a hot sauce brand? Like, tell me about that.
Yeah. Truly, completely by accident. I mean, as far as promise you didn't sit down and be like, here's our business plan. Like it was an accident to that extent, right? We still haven't really done that. And so my business partner and I, we were friends first, met at church. I mean, literally I remember first day I met him coming in, checking the kids into the nursery, and somebody's like, your twin is in the sanctuary. And I was like, what? Seriously, walked up to him and
guys look alike.
yeah. And then from then on, we just kind of became friends. I also have an interest and a passion. I haven't done it quite as much since hot sauce came into the picture, but in craft beer. So I've brewed like a dozen batches of craft beer and just used to get into that. So when I met Casey, he was like, man, I've always wanted to do craft beer. And I said, well, come over, we'll brew some beer. So we did. We did a couple batches together and we'd hang out. And just loved that process. It's about as much into science as I get, right? We were sort of like Jesse and Walter White, right? In that partnership, without selling it. We joke with people. Well, we made beer, but it was terrible. So we tried hot sauce. It's not really true, but it's kind of funny. So yeah, he brought some hot sauce over. I grew up in Texas. I've always been a big fan of hot sauce. I've always had, like, my wife carves out like a special part in the cabinet for my hot sauces and in the fridge. So he brought he was like, he brought some hot sauce over and he was like, this is good, but I've always wanted to make hot sauce, right? Now that I know Casey 5 years later or whatever, however long it's been since we first met, he just likes to try new stuff. He's a hobbyist, right? Mm-hmm. So one day he texted me like several months later and was like, come outside. And I was like, this is weird. And I come outside, he had a bottle of hot sauce and I tried it and I was like, dude, this is really good. And I was like, if you ever think you want to do something with this, let's do it. And he texted me later and was like, let's try it. And I said, all right, I want in. That's literally how it started. So I ordered, 48 bottles on Amazon and we got together and, September of 2020 and we're smoking peppers and doing our own thing. And within I don't know, by Christmas that year, we had sold like 400 bottles without even a website to friends, just our network.
Yeah. Wow.
And then had a contract with a bottler, with a manufacturer, to make it in a commercial kitchen. And our first year in business, we sold 10,000 bottles. Increased that last year by about 50%. So yeah, it's just totally, man, like didn't plan it. But I will tell you though, on a more like personal and fundamental level, I felt like I kind of wanted something to try to build, right? Even though I was kind of, if you looked at it on paper, I was successful. But I was just like, man, I really wanted, like the year prior, my wife had written a book and like we went through that and I supported her through that. And so when this hot sauce thing came up, I was like, man, I kind of want this, right? Like I want to build this and I want the challenge to do it. And, so that was more of a fundamental level of why, or how it started.
That's amazing. Well, now the marketer in me is kicking in. So like you sold 400 bottles to friends and family. That's pretty good. That probably means you had a pretty good sized network, but how did you go from 400 bottles in like a quarter to 10,000 bottles in a full year? Like, were you guys running ads? Were y'all just doing social media? Were you just like, is that any of that wholesale? Like, what are you doing there?
Yeah. So we went from, we did kind of our main like channels, if you will, or revenue centers. So we do, a lot of it was retail, like to farmers markets and that kind of stuff. Like in our first year in business, we did like 50 events. Mm-hmm. So between like weekly farmers markets and bigger, one-off events and that kind of stuff. But we also had like 25 wholesale clients in the first like 6 months. And it was just like knocking on doors and reaching out to people and getting in small shops and that kind of stuff. And then our first year in business and at Christmas, we did a ton of volume, and we ship all over. I mean, we've shipped to like 40 states and now we're actually we just shipped our first international order. We're in a shop in Sweden as well, which is crazy. So, that was, we had a website, by like January, but we did a lot of that just on Facebook, posting, and we have run, other than like a few ads on social media, we've only done like 2 or 3 paid ads. Everything else has just been organic, basically.
That's amazing. Yeah. Well, paid ads is where we live. So I can, if you ever have questions, I'm happy to help. But I will tell you my mind, if I was you, I would like TikTok, if it survives Congress. But if TikTok and TikTok influencers will, I think there's so much potential there. I don't know if you guys have tried any of that yet, but it's, from a CPG, like that is huge right now.
We actually had a guy that this was a former student of mine that now runs his own marketing agency. And he actually was like, let me do a 3-month test on TikTok. And so he had a guy that was doing some posts. Honestly, we didn't have a lot of traction from that, but we also weren't doing a lot of content on our own. He was doing it. Yeah. So we I don't think we leveraged the platform authentically to our brand the way we should have.
Yeah. We tell everybody when they're like, we do a lot of consulting for organic social media, because it's like, if you do the organic really, really well, it usually ends up complementing your paid ads really, really well. Like they're two sides of the same coin. You need both to do it really, really well. But you need to, so the tactic for getting better on social media, what we tell everybody is like, you have to increase your input on that platform. So how much time are you spending, like as a business owner, consuming that platform like you would, like your customers might? And so you sort of you're changing your gut internally to understand like what breaks through on the platform, how people communicate, how do you blend in where it doesn't look like an ad? And then you have to do the next part of the flywheel is output, right? You got to really increase your output to sort of see what works for you and your brand. Like you guys reviewing hot sauces, showing how the hot sauce is made, telling the story about that. Like your partner, you said your partner's name was Chris, right? Casey sounds like a barrel of laughs. He sounds like he's going to be the adventure guy doing all kind of craziness. I see so many different like 90-second videos with stories and stuff that would help really connect you guys as a brand. But then like user-generated content, like which is UGC, and I'd have to dig in to see what the guy did. But like they must have, something was missing, because like it is the best way to grow right now is having other people review your product and it being authentic. And like it would, I'm shocked by that. That's interesting. I'm gonna have to go find you guys on TikTok. Is it under your brand or is it under somebody else's brand?
Yeah, no, it's under ours, but it was because he was he was in our account. Like he actually ran the TikTok account for us for like a couple months.
And the cool thing is too, is like when you figure out how to get that organic content to land really, really well, is that then you can come in and use that same video that was promoted for free by the platform, right? Let's say TikTok showed your video to, I don't know, 100,000 people, right? That's awesome. That's free distribution. But then you can sort of slightly change it because you already know that video, the hook, the story, all the things work. You can change the CTA at the end of the video, the call to action, and make it an actual ad and then run an ad against it. And then that's where really organic and paid start to play well together, because then you're paying to promote it. You already know it's going to do well. And so, there's a ton there, but I'm just trying to help you. Like, let's sell 1 million bottles in 24.
And I'll tell you, we've done very little paid. And I think part of it is that my partner also works full time, and neither of us are like, it's one of those businesses, and this is probably another leader lesson, right? Especially entrepreneur lesson, where for us, it kind of still operates at the level of a hobby, but it deserves the attention of a business.
You sold 10,000 bottles. I think, I think you've broken through the hobby barrier.
and yet we're both of us, and both of us we just haven't really put in the time, other than like I'm majority owner, so I do the majority of the business side of it. Right. He's not even on social media at all. And so we're just like, it's just tough. The other part that we haven't even, mentioned is like our biggest growth point right now is private label. We're doing private label sauces. So we're making we have 8 different private label items. We make barbecue sauces for restaurants. We make the official hot sauce of Belmont Athletics. We make Austin Peas hot sauce. So we're getting into that pretty aggressively.
Do you guys own the manufacturing facility, or are you just?
No, it's actually just we just have a co-packer.
Okay, so you're like white labeling through the white label. Is that how that works?
Kind of, yeah. So like the restaurant that we work with in Cross Plains, Tennessee, they came to us and they were like, "We love y'all's hot sauce. We want our own barbecue sauce. We just don't want to mess with it. Can you design one for us and then bottle it and just bring it to us?" We're like, "Yep."
Give it a name. That's awesome. That's so cool. Yeah, man. That's good. Well, I told you my background is in barbecue and food, so we could do another whole hour and a half on the food world, and maybe we'll have to have episode 2. But I know you're a busy guy, and I've been blocked off for an hour here, so I want to give you a second to sort of tell everybody how we can find you and support you and promote you, and then we'll get out of here.
Yeah. Well, I do have, I'm on all the normal, channels, Facebook and Instagram, and I don't do it quite as much posting on those personally. If anything, our Two Heads Hot Sauce Instagram is probably the one that's most active. That is we do have a full-time social media person that runs that. So anything that looks good, she gets credit for that. So, That's exciting. But yeah, we're at Two Heads Hot Sauce, and then we have a website, of course, twoheadsheat.com, and we ship anywhere in the country. And then. Yeah, I post on LinkedIn a decent bit. Like when I'll go visit, a company and do a workshop, I usually will do a selfie with all them and then post.
I was gonna say your selfie game is unparalleled. You do a great job with that.
No, I appreciate it. I have a lot of fun. I will say, I'm given a lot of platforms, right, to be able to speak to people and to try to, you talked about communication. My main thing is. I'm a big believer that God's given me a voice to use, and I want to use that well. I want to steward that well, man. Like I have a lot of opportunities, and I want to be a good steward of that. So, I guess the websites and places where you can find me are hopefully a place where you can access some of that.
Hey, that's about as good a word to end on as any right there. Dr. Jeremy Fyke, thanks for coming on the show, man, sharing the highlight with us. We appreciate all you guys out there that are listening, and we will see you next week.